Okay, try to follow along now. This envelope and the article that was found in it was found by the Dallas police at 1026 North Beckley, where Lee Harvey Oswald was living. And this image comes from the Portal to Texas History, and originally from the Dallas City Archives, and came from the police department. So this is an envelope they found at Lee Harvey Oswald's residence in Dallas, and you'll note that it has a return address on it, room 329, 799 Broadway, New York, New York, which is the address of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. You can see the clipping in there refers to Lee Harvey Oswald's arrest in New Orleans in August of 1963. And this comes from the same source and is a description of this item. One newspaper clipping, Times-Picayune, New Orleans, regarding Oswald's fine in New Orleans for disturbing the peace. Sent to Oswald, 2703, Mercedes, Fort Worth, from room 329, 799 Broadway, New York, New York. Apparently, the writer of this notation is assuming that the clipping was sent to Oswald in this envelope, but that cannot be correct, since the envelope, you can see on it, has a cancellation date of in 1962, and Oswald's arrest and subsequent fine occurred in 1963, so the envelope could not have contained this article when it was canceled. So obviously this envelope had a letter or something else in it when it was originally sent from the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, and Oswald was simply storing his clipping in the envelope. It was acknowledged by the National Director of the FPCC, Vincent T. Lee, that they did have correspondence with Oswald, and he turned over letters to the FBI, the earliest of which was this one, May 22nd, 1963. Now I'd better deal with the date on the envelope here just to make this clear. It's definitely 1962, and I wouldn't be able to read the month and day there unless I knew the possibilities of when it could be. That is, it looks like there's a 2, it starts with a 2, and then there's a 5 probably. So it looks like 2-5, which would be the day of the month, and then they would have the month. It looks like it begins with an A, and Oswald lived at the address here, Mercedes Street, from July to October. So it seems to me that the date on here has to signify 25 August 1962. So that is what I think the date of this letter cancellation is, August 25th, 1962. And I said the earliest letter acknowledged by V.T. Lee was May 22nd, 1963. So now Lee did not become the director of the FPCC until September 1962. So the envelope predates Lee's stewardship of the national organization. So at the time this envelope was sent to Oswald, the director of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee was Richard Gibson. And on September 20th, 1962, the FBI sent a memo to the Attorney General, Robert Kennedy, in which they informed him of an interview with Richard Gibson. And here it says, on August 27th, 1962, we forwarded a memorandum which summarized the results of an interview of Gibson. So that's when they forwarded the interview. The interview presumably happened either on the 27th or the 26th or the 25th, and this is the same time as that envelope that was sent to Lee Harvey Oswald. And in here it says that he offered, that is Gibson, offered to become an informant for the FBI in return for payment. and the FBI said they turned him down. So perhaps something is going on involving Gibson at the same time that he's in communication with Oswald, that he wants to become an informant for the FBI. And then on September 13th, 1962, one of our sources was informed by Vincent Theodore Lee, an FPCC leader in New York City, that Gibson had left a letter in Lee's mailbox in which Gibson indicated he was going to leave for Algeria on that date. So Gibson left the country on September 13th, 1962, 2 to 3 weeks after he had sent Oswald that letter. And down in the last paragraph here, it says, on September 14th, 1962, another source was advised by Lee, Vincent Lee, that Gibson's departure from the United States was unexpected. So he suddenly, quickly leaves. He says, was unexpected, and that a representative of the Cuban mission to the United Nations had informed Gibson it would be necessary for Gibson to go to Canada as things were getting hot for Gibson in the United States. So we have a change in leadership of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee that coincides with a letter sent to Lee Harvey Oswald, a letter which we do not have in the evidence, and a letter which the Fair Play for Cuba Committee under Vincent Lee doesn't acknowledge existed. And a letter that was sent in 1962, which by the official story was a time when Lee Harvey Oswald wasn't even involved with the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Now, as I already said, in August of 1962, Gibson had offered himself to the FBI as an informant. Well, here in 1965, the FBI says that at this time, Richard Thomas Gibson is an informant for the CIA. He's got a code name, Sugar. And so by 1965, at least, Gibson has a relationship with the CIA. But in 1962, he was trying to have a relationship with the FBI. You can argue about what that means. What I think it means is, in 1962, he wasn't working for either one of them, and he wanted to get money by working for the FBI. And that by 1965, he's working for the CIA, but we don't know when he started working for the CIA. And now we come to what I think is the most interesting document of all of these. This is an 11/26/63, November 26, 1963 cablegram, CIA, and it's referring to a November 23rd, 63 conversation, the day after the assassination. And down toward the bottom it says, Swiss Federal Police informed that delicate source furnished conversation in French between unknown individual and Richard Thomas Gibson. That's our man who left the FPCC, Lausanne, Switzerland, as follows. And the conversation is in French, but an English translation is provided. And this is the day after the assassination, after Oswald has hit the news, of course. And Gibson says, I was exchanging correspondence with him. He is a nut, a former Marine. And also, further down, he says, yes, but Oswald is a fellow who was called to my attention 2 years ago because he was arrested for having shouted, Long live Fidel, in the streets of Dallas, Texas. There was quite a hubbub at the time. He wrote letters to me and became a member of the committee. So, he's saying in 1961, Oswald was shouting, Viva Fidel in Dallas. And down at the bottom, there is nothing to, for example, all this correspondence has been destroyed for some time now. I have burned everything. So he's saying there's nothing to worry about because I've burned all this evidence of my correspondence with Lee Oswald, the man who just shot the president. I think that's very interesting, and we should wonder, I think, why he thinks there's nothing to worry about, unless he burned the letters that Oswald received, because they would still be there if he hadn't. So how does he know he has nothing to worry about? Even if he destroyed all of his own copies of Oswald's letters, or copies of letters he may have made that he sent Oswald, how does he know that Oswald's letters have been destroyed? I think this implies that there's more going on between Gibson and Oswald than has ever been told publicly. And this document is very interesting in light of that, the one we just did there, the phone call. Now it says, I can't read everything up there because secret is stamped over it. The Foreign Service something of the United States of America. I think it's a State Department document, and I think it's good to keep in mind who is saying what here. It says CIA has no objection to declassification, so maybe it's coming from the CIA. It's to the director of the FBI, Hoover, and you read the introduction part here. It says, Mr. Darwin Curtis, CIA, and there's a note there, a CIA officer, Paris advised on December 10th, 1963, that Richard Gibson was interviewed by John Gossett, Acting Consul General, American Embassy, Paris, on December 9th. Mr. Gossett reported as follows. So this seems kind of convoluted to me because the CIA isn't talking to Gibson directly. This might be a way of letting Hoover know from the CIA that this guy from the State Department is saying this. And maybe Hoover knows that's not necessarily what the CIA would say. I don't know. But I think it's interesting to note that. And anyway, what Gossett says is, one, that he had no correspondence, they're talking about Gibson, he had no correspondence with or knowledge of Oswald as Lee Harvey Oswald. Well, and we'll get to it here, he calls him by another name, but the last letter apparently sent to Lee Harvey Oswald under Gibson's stewardship was addressed to Lee Harvey Oswald. So that might be a lie. That he did, however, recall receiving in the late summer of 1962. Now here, in the telephone call, he said 2 years ago, so he's talking about 1961. Here it's 62. A letter from Fort Worth from a man who signed his name Lee Beaumont, indicating an interest in organizing a Fair Play for Cuba committee in Fort Worth and enclosing a Fort Worth newspaper clipping, including a photograph of himself concerning some activity or other in that general field. Well, this relates very nicely to the Dallas police find of the envelope with the clipping in it, except the clipping is from 1963. It's not from 1962. So it almost looks like a bit of reverse engineering here to make the inattentive reader, if he even knows about that other piece of evidence, the envelope, think that that's what it's being referred to here. But it can't be. Not if it's, unless it's a lie, it can't be. Mr. Gibson said, to the best of his memory, Beaumont received a routine reply enclosing some literature. Gibson had no further correspondence with Beaumont. Gibson himself left the U.S. in September 1962. Although he had no reason at the time to believe that Beaumont was a pseudonym, he now thinks that Beaumont may have been Oswald. Gibson pointed out that the FCC received many letters and visits from cranks, some of whom, of course, used pseudonyms. I asked him at this point if he thought it possible that in replying to Beaumont, he might have given him the name of someone already active in the FCC in Fort Worth area for Beaumont to get in touch with, which would give us a further lead. Gibson said no, he was fairly sure that they did not, because in the South and Southwest at that time, virtually the only workers for the FCC were Negroes, that in that region they would, of course, avoid putting a Southern white in contact with their Negro leadership, and that Beaumont was obviously, from his letter, a Southern white. Gibson did not recall they had anyone in Fort Worth at that time anyway. So he's telling a different story here. It's one that preserves a possible earlier relationship with Oswald, but it's not the same thing he was saying on the telephone. So I think this means that Gibson was not a CIA asset at the time that he communicated with Oswald, and that he was not a CIA asset at the time of the assassination, but that he probably became a CIA asset between that telephone call and his interview with the American consul in Paris. I think that's what the evidence points to. And, well, I'm out of time.